David Chen stared at his computer screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he tried to focus on the lines of code in front of him. But his mind kept drifting to the morning's team meeting, where his boss, Marcus Wright, had once again humiliated him in front of everyone. The memory of Marcus's mocking voice made his stomach twist into knots. The office around him buzzed with the usual afternoon activity. The sound of typing, quiet conversations, and the gentle hum of the air conditioning filled the air. David's desk was in the corner of the open-plan office, right where Marcus could easily watch him from his glass-walled office. It felt like being in a fishbowl, always under observation. "Hey, David, got a minute?" Sarah from the testing team called out softly. She walked over to his desk, carrying a stack of papers. David liked Sarah. She was one of the few people who still treated him normally, unlike others who now avoided him to stay out of Marcus's bad books. "Sure," David replied, grateful for the distraction. He noticed dark circles under Sarah's eyes, probably from the overtime they'd all been putting in for the new project. "These test results from yesterday's build. Something's not right," she said, spreading the papers on his desk. "I wanted to check with you before sending them to Marcus." David's heart sank. He knew what would happen. Even if he fixed the problem right away, Marcus would use it as another excuse to attack him. It had been like this for the past 8 months, ever since Marcus took over as the development team leader. As they looked through the results together, heavy footsteps approached. David didn't need to look up to know who it was. The whole atmosphere in the office changed whenever Marcus walked by. People suddenly became very interested in their screens, typing faster, trying to look busy. Well, Marcus's voice boomed behind them. "Another problem with Chen's code, I see." He was a tall man with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit that seemed to emphasize his imposing presence. "I'm not surprised. This is becoming a daily occurrence, isn't it?" Sarah tried to explain. "Actually, it's just a minor." "Did I ask for your input?" Marcus cut her off sharply. She fell silent, her face reddening. David felt his hands curl into fists under his desk. He forced them to relax, remembering his father's advice. "Keep your head down, work hard, and things will get better." But things weren't getting better. They were getting worse. Marcus leaned over David's desk, his cologne overwhelming. "Fix this mess by tonight, and I want a full report on my desk first thing tomorrow morning explaining how you managed to screw up such a simple task." He picked up one of the test result papers, crumpled it, and dropped it on David's keyboard. "Maybe if you spend less time chatting and more time working, we wouldn't have these issues." As Marcus walked away, David could hear him muttering just loud enough for nearby people to hear. "This is what happens when you hire people just to fill diversity quotas." The words stung, but David had learned to keep his face neutral. He worked hard to get this job, graduating top of his class from a good university, passing multiple technical interviews. But none of that seemed to matter to Marcus. Sarah touched his arm gently. "Don't listen to him, David. We all know you're one of the best developers here." David managed a small smile. "Thanks, Sarah." He smoothed out the crumpled paper and added it to his growing file of documented incidents. Hidden in his bottom drawer was a folder containing emails, meeting notes, and witness accounts of Marcus's behavior. He wasn't sure what he'd do with them yet, but something told him they might be important someday. Looking at his watch, David realized it was already 6:30 p.m. Most of his colleagues were packing up to leave, but he knew he'd be here late again, fixing the issues and preparing the report Marcus demanded. As he opened the test files, a new email notification popped up. It was from Marcus, marked urgent, with the entire management team CC'd. David took a deep breath and clicked open the email, knowing that whatever it contained would only make this long day even longer. The storm clouds were gathering, and sooner or later, something would have to break. The next morning, David arrived at the office early, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. He had stayed until midnight fixing the code issues and writing the detailed report Marcus demanded. The office was quiet, with only the cleaning staff moving around, vacuuming between the desks. As he settled into his chair, David noticed a small coffee cup on his desk with a sticky note attached. "You look like you needed this, Sarah." The simple act of kindness made him smile for the first time in days. His moment of peace didn't last long. Marcus stormed into the office at 8:30 a.m., his face already red with anger. He walked straight to David's desk, holding a printed copy of the report David had submitted. Is this some kind of joke? Marcus slammed the report on David's desk, making several people jump. 12 pages of excuses? This is completely useless. He hadn't even bothered to lower his voice, ensuring everyone could hear his outburst. David's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The report explains exactly what caused the issue and how I fixed it. I also included suggestions to prevent similar problems in the future. Oh, so now you're telling me how to run my team. Marcus leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Listen carefully, Chen. You're on very thin ice. One more mistake, and you'll be looking for a new job. Understand? Before David could respond, Marcus's phone rang. He straightened up, immediately switching to a pleasant tone as he answered. Yes, Mr. Thompson, of course I'll be right there. He shot David one last glare before heading to the executive floor. Emily from the HR department had witnessed the entire scene from her desk. She walked over to David, concern evident on her face. David, are you okay? That was completely inappropriate behavior. I'm fine, David replied automatically, though his racing heart suggested otherwise. Emily lowered her voice. You know you can file a formal complaint, right? This kind of harassment isn't acceptable. David nodded, but they both knew it wasn't that simple. Marcus had connections with upper management, and previous complaints against him had mysteriously disappeared. The day continued to get worse. During the afternoon project meeting, Marcus presented David's successfully fixed code as his own work. Fortunately, I was able to step in and salvage the situation, he announced to the team. Some people just aren't cut out for high-pressure environments. David felt his face burning as his colleagues avoided eye contact. Only Sarah dared to speak up. Actually, David was here until midnight fixing. Sarah, Marcus cut her off sharply. Perhaps you should focus on your own responsibilities instead of defending incompetence. After the meeting, David retreated to the break room, needing a moment alone. His hands shook as he tried to pour coffee into his mug, spilling some on the counter. The stress was starting to affect him physically. He had lost weight, couldn't sleep properly, and his doctor had warned him about his rising blood pressure. As he cleaned up the spilled coffee, he overheard two senior developers talking around the corner. Did you see what happened in the meeting? One whispered. Yeah, Marcus is getting worse. What can we do? Thompson loves him, and he's already forced 3 good developers to quit this year. Poor David, he's probably next. David gripped the counter tightly, anger and frustration building inside him. He thought about his parents' sacrifices to send him to college, about all the nights he had spent studying and practicing to become a better programmer. Was he going to let one bully destroy everything he had worked for? Back at his desk, he opened his drawer and looked at the folder of documented incidents. It had grown thicker over the months. Sarah walked by and noticed him staring at it. Whatever you're thinking of doing, she said quietly, I've got your back, and I'm not the only one. David looked up at her, then around the office at his colleagues. Many of them were watching, quickly turning away when he caught their eyes. He realized that he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. Something had to change, and maybe it was time for him to be the one to stand up. The following week started with an important announcement. TechCore Solutions had landed their biggest client yet, a major banking corporation. The whole office was buzzing with excitement, but David felt only dread. He knew Marcus would use this high-pressure project to make his life even more difficult. His fears proved correct during the project kickoff meeting. Marcus stood at the front of the conference room, pointing at the presentation screen. For this critical project, we need our best developers. Unfortunately, he paused, staring directly at David. Some team members aren't performing at the level we need. David sat quietly, documenting every word in his notebook. Next to him, Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The room felt tense as Marcus continued his presentation. Chen, Marcus suddenly called out. Since you clearly need more oversight, you'll report directly to me every 2 hours on your progress. I won't let your incompetence ruin this project. After the meeting, Emily from HR caught up with David in the hallway. This has gone too far, she whispered. I've been keeping track too. With my documentation and yours, we might have a case. David hesitated. What about your job? Marcus has friends in management. Emily straightened her shoulders. Some things are more important than playing it safe. Meet me in conference room B after lunch. During lunch, David noticed several of his colleagues whispering and looking his way. Instead of their usual avoidance, he saw sympathy and what looked like support in their eyes. Word had spread about his meeting with HR. At 1:00 p.m., David entered conference room B with his folder of evidence. Emily was already there, along with Sarah and, to his surprise, James from the legal department. I asked James to join us. Emily explained. What Marcus is doing isn't just bullying, it's workplace harassment with possible discrimination elements. James nodded, adjusting his glasses. I've reviewed some of Emily's notes. This is serious, David. The company could face legal issues if they don't address it. They spent the next hour going through everything: the emails, meeting recordings, witness statements, and David's detailed documentation. Sarah added her own observations, including times when Marcus had taken credit for David's work. The problem is, James said, rubbing his forehead, Marcus is close to Mr. Thompson. Any complaint will need to be solid. As if on cue, Marcus's voice boomed from outside. Where's Chen? He missed his 2-hour check-in. The door flew open. Marcus stood there, his face turning from anger to suspicious rage as he saw the group. What's going on here? Team meeting, Emily said calmly, but Marcus wasn't listening. So, this is how you spend company time? Planning conspiracies? He stormed into the room, pointing at David. You're done. Pack your things. You don't have the authority to fire anyone. James spoke up, standing. And this meeting is documented and legitimate. Marcus spun towards James. Stay out of this. Chen has been undermining this team since day one. I've got reports. Fabricated reports, Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking but firm. We all know David's work is excellent. You're the one creating problems. Marcus's face turned purple. He stepped towards Sarah aggressively, but David moved between them. Don't, David said quietly, looking Marcus in the eye for the first time. Are you threatening me? Marcus laughed incredulously. You're all witnesses. He just threatened me. The only threats here have been from you, Emily stated, holding up her phone. And I've been recording since you walked in. Marcus fell silent, finally realizing the situation he had walked into. His eyes darted between them before settling on David with pure hatred. This isn't over, he hissed, backing toward the door. Thompson will hear about this. After he left, the room remained quiet for a moment. James broke the silence. Well, that went better than expected. He just gave us even more evidence. David sat down heavily, his heart pounding. There was no going back now. The next few days would determine everything: his career, his future, and possibly the fate of every employee who had suffered under Marcus's leadership. Ready for what comes next? Emily asked gently. David looked at the supportive faces around him and nodded. The time for staying quiet was over. The next morning, tension filled the office like a thundercloud about to break. David arrived to find his computer access blocked and a meeting request from Mr. Thompson, the company's CEO, scheduled for 10 a.m. His colleagues kept glancing his way nervously as they walked past his desk. Sarah hurried over as soon as she arrived. Marcus has been in Thompson's office since 7 this morning, she whispered. He's trying to get ahead of the story. David nodded, feeling surprisingly calm. After months of anxiety and fear, having everything out in the open felt like a weight had been lifted. Emily from HR appeared at his desk, holding a thick folder. Ready? She asked. James is already waiting in the conference room with the legal documents. As they walked to the meeting, David could see Marcus through the glass walls of Thompson's office, gesturing dramatically. The CEO's face was unreadable as he listened. The conference room was large, designed for board meetings. James sat at the long table, organizing papers, while 2 other executives David didn't know well were also present. His heart beat faster, but he kept his expression neutral as he took his seat. At exactly 10 a.m., Mr. Thompson entered, followed by Marcus, who had a triumphant smirk on his face. Let's make this quick, Thompson began, but Emily cut in smoothly. Sir, before we start, you need to see these documents. She slid the folder across the table. We have extensive evidence of workplace harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power. Thompson frowned, opening the folder. The room fell silent except for the sound of turning pages. Marcus's smirk began to fade as the CEO's expression darkened. These emails. Thompson looked up at Marcus. Did you really send these? Sir, they're taken out of context. Marcus protested. Chen has been undermining. What about these recordings? Thompson pressed play on one of the audio files Emily had prepared. Marcus's voice filled the room, spewing threats and racial slurs from the previous day's confrontation. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's obviously edited. This is a conspiracy against me. Chen has turned the whole team against me because he can't handle proper management. Suddenly, the door opened. Sarah walked in, followed by 5 other team members. We all have statements, she said firmly. We've watched Marcus bully and harass David for months. We have our own documentation. Marcus jumped to his feet. This is ridiculous. I built this team. Everything was fine until Chen started causing problems. He stormed toward David, his face twisted with rage. You think you can destroy my career? I'll show you what happens to people who cross me. Before anyone could react, Marcus grabbed David's shirt collar, yanking him up from his chair. Security cameras whirred in the corners, recording everything. David stood calmly, looking Marcus directly in the eyes. Let go, he said quietly but firmly. You're only making things worse for yourself. Or what? Marcus sneered, tightening his grip. You'll cry to HR again? No, David replied, carefully removing Marcus's hands from his collar. I don't need to do anything. You've shown everyone exactly who you are. The room had fallen completely silent. Mr. Thompson stood up slowly. Security has been called, Marcus. This meeting is over, and so is your employment with TechCore Solutions. You can't fire me, Marcus shouted, spinning to face Thompson. I made this department what it is. Actually, James spoke up, we can and we are. The security footage from this meeting alone gives us grounds for immediate termination. Please leave before we have to press charges. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Marcus looked around wildly, seeing nothing but firm, resolute faces. His shoulders slumped as reality finally hit him. This isn't over, he muttered as security escorted him out. Mr. Thompson turned to David. I owe you an apology. This should have been addressed long ago. He looked around the room. We'll need statements from everyone. HR will be implementing new policies to ensure this never happens again. David sat back down, his hands slightly shaking from adrenaline. Sarah squeezed his shoulder supportively. It wasn't the end. There would be meetings, paperwork, and probably some difficult days ahead, but as he watched Marcus being escorted from the building, David knew the worst was finally over. The week after Marcus's dramatic departure was filled with changes at TechCore Solutions. David sat in his usual spot, but the atmosphere in the office felt completely different. Gone was the constant tension that had hung over everyone like a dark cloud. People talked and laughed more freely, no longer afraid of drawing unwanted attention. Emily from HR had been busy conducting interviews with every team member, documenting their experiences under Marcus's leadership. The stories that emerged painted a picture of systematic bullying that went far beyond David's case. 3 former employees who had quit because of Marcus even reached out after hearing about the incident. You started something important, Sarah told David during their lunch break in the office cafeteria. People are finally speaking up about other problems too. She gestured to a group of developers from different departments who were openly discussing their workplace concerns with a member of the newly formed Employee Relations Committee. David nodded, still processing everything that had happened. His phone buzzed with another message from a news website wanting to interview him about workplace harassment in the tech industry. He had declined all interview requests, preferring to focus on healing and moving forward. Mr. Thompson called David into his office that afternoon. The CEO's usual stern expression had softened considerably. Take a seat, David, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. We need to discuss the future of the development team. David's stomach tightened slightly, old anxieties trying to surface. But Thompson smiled, which was a rare sight. First, I want to apologize again for not seeing what was happening sooner. Marcus fooled a lot of people, including me. Thank you, sir, David replied quietly. Now, Thompson continued, pulling out a folder, I've been reviewing your work history here, your original interviews, and your project contributions. I have to say, I'm impressed. Even under extreme pressure, Your work remained exceptional. David listened as Thompson explained the company's new direction. They were implementing strict anti-harassment policies, mandatory management training, and an anonymous reporting system. But then came the surprising part. We need a new team leader, Thompson said. Someone who understands both the technical and human aspects of the job. The team respects you, David. They trust you. Would you consider taking the position? David's eyes widened. Sir, are you sure? I mean, I'm relatively junior compared to. Experience isn't just about years, Thompson interrupted. It's about character, leadership, and the ability to stand up for what's right. You've demonstrated all of these qualities. Back at his desk, David thought about the offer. Sarah noticed his distracted expression. Everything okay? Thompson offered me Marcus's position, he said quietly. Sarah's face lit up. That's fantastic. You'll be amazing at it. Please tell me you said yes. I asked for time to think about it, David replied. It's a big responsibility. Just then, James from legal stopped by his desk. Good news, he said, keeping his voice low. Marcus tried to sue for wrongful termination, but after we presented our evidence, his lawyer advised him to drop it. He's not coming back. A weight David hadn't even realized he was still carrying lifted from his shoulders. He looked around the office, seeing his colleagues working together, helping each other, no longer walking on eggshells. He thought about Thompson's offer again. Opening his computer, David began drafting ideas for team improvements, things he had wanted to suggest for months but couldn't under Marcus. Better collaboration tools, mentoring programs for junior developers, regular feedback sessions where everyone could speak freely. I'll do it, he said suddenly. Sarah, who was still at his desk, looked confused. Do what? Take the team leader position, David explained, but I'll need everyone's help to make it work. You'll have it, Sarah smiled. We all saw how you handled everything with Marcus. You showed us that standing up to bullies doesn't always mean fighting back physically. Sometimes it means being smart, staying professional, and letting the truth speak for itself. David nodded, feeling truly confident for the first time in months. The dark chapter with Marcus was over. Now it was time to write a new story, one where everyone could succeed together. 2 months into his new role as team leader, David faced his first major challenge. The banking project that Marcus had started was falling behind schedule, and the client was getting nervous. David sat in his new office, reviewing the project timeline as his team gathered for the morning meeting. Unlike Marcus's aggressive meetings, David had rearranged the conference room with a round table, making sure everyone felt equal and heard. As the team members took their seats, he noticed they looked tired but not afraid, a significant improvement from the past. Okay, everyone, David began, let's talk honestly about where we are with the banking project. He pulled up the project dashboard on the screen. No blame, no pressure, just solutions. Sarah spoke first, something that would have been unthinkable under Marcus's leadership. The security module is giving us problems. The client's requirements keep changing, and we're struggling to keep up. Instead of criticism, David nodded encouragingly. What do we need to solve this? To everyone's surprise, Mike, who had barely spoken in meetings for the past year, raised his hand. I worked on a similar system in my last job. If Sarah's team could use some help, I could share what I learned. Perfect, David smiled. That's exactly the kind of collaboration we need. Anyone else facing challenges? One by one, team members opened up about their struggles and offered solutions. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense, fearful meetings under Marcus. People were actually working together, helping each other succeed. Later that afternoon, Mr. Thompson stopped by David's office. I heard about this morning's meeting, he said, settling into a chair. Word travels fast around here. David felt a moment of concern, but Thompson was smiling. The team is different now, the CEO continued. Productivity is up 40%, sick days are down, and we've had 3 former employees asked to return to the company. The team was always great, David replied. They just needed the freedom to show it. Just then, Emily from HR appeared at the door with an urgent expression. David, we have a situation. Marcus was just spotted in the building lobby. David's heart skipped a beat, but he remained calm. How did he get in? He told security he left some personal items, Emily explained, but he's demanding to speak with his old team. Security is detaining him, but he's making quite a scene. David thought for a moment, then stood up. I'll handle this. Are you sure? Thompson asked, concerned. We can have security remove him. No, David said firmly. Running from bullies never solves anything. I learned that the hard way. David took the elevator to the lobby, where he found Marcus arguing loudly with two security guards. The former manager looked disheveled, his usually perfect suit wrinkled and his hair unkempt. There he is, Marcus shouted when he saw David. The man who stole my job. Are you happy now? My career is ruined because of you. David approached calmly, keeping a safe distance. You ruined your own career, Marcus. Through your actions and choices. My actions. Marcus laughed bitterly. I was making this team stronger. You've probably turned them all soft and weak by now. Actually, David replied quietly, we just landed 2 new major clients. The team is performing better than ever. Turns out people work better when they're not terrified of their manager. Marcus's face reddened. You think you're so much better than me? I built that team. No, David shook his head. You tried to break that team, but they were stronger than you knew. Now, please leave before we have to press charges for trespassing. The security guard stepped forward. Marcus looked around wildly, but seeing no support, his shoulders slumped. This isn't over, he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow. As Marcus was escorted out, David noticed several team members had gathered in the lobby, watching. They had come down to support him, just as he had stood up for them. You okay? Sarah asked as they headed back to the office. David smiled, realizing he truly was. Yeah, I am. Some people never learn, but we have. Now, let's get back to work. We'd have a project to deliver. 6 months had passed since Marcus's final appearance at TechCore Solutions. The office had transformed into a place people actually looked forward to coming to each morning. David stood in front of his team, presenting the results of the banking project they had finally completed. Thanks to everyone's hard work, he said, pointing to the project metrics on the screen, we delivered everything 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The team members exchanged proud looks, but more importantly, we did it together, supporting each other every step of the way. The client representative, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, stood up. I've worked with many development teams, she began, but I've never seen one quite like this. The level of communication, collaboration, and quality is exceptional. After the presentation, Mr. Thompson pulled David aside. The banking client is so impressed, they want to triple their contract with us. And they're not the only ones. Word has spread about how we handle projects here. David smiled, remembering the dark days under Marcus's leadership when everyone worked in fear. Now, the office was full of energy and innovation. People shared ideas freely, helped each other solve problems, and celebrated team successes together. Later that afternoon, Emily from HR visited David's office with exciting news. Remember those anti-bullying policies we implemented after Marcus left? She asked. Several major tech companies have contacted us about adopting similar programs. They want you to speak at an industry conference about workplace culture transformation. David looked surprised. Me? I'm not sure I'm qualified to. Stop right there, Sarah interrupted, walking in with a stack of reports. That's exactly why you should do it. You're still the same humble person who stood up to Marcus, even after all this success. The next day, David received an unexpected email. It was from Tom, one of the developers who had quit under Marcus's management. I heard about the changes at TechCore, the email read. My new company is fine, but I miss the team. Any chance you're hiring? David shared the email with his team during their daily coffee break, a tradition he had started to encourage casual conversation and bonding. What do you think? He asked. Should we bring Tom back? Definitely, Mike replied. His security expertise would be perfect for our new projects. And he was always ready to help others, Sarah added. He'll fit right in with how we work now. As David walked around the office later, he noticed small but significant changes. The stress and tension that had once filled the air were gone. Instead, He saw people collaborating at each other's desks, heard friendly discussions about code solutions, and witnessed junior developers confidently asking questions without fear of ridicule. Near the end of the day, Mr. Thompson called an unexpected office meeting. The team gathered, curious about the announcement. "I just received some amazing news," Thompson began, beaming. TechCore Solutions has been named Best Workplace in Tech by Industry Leaders magazine. They specifically mentioned our innovative approach to team management and anti-bullying initiatives. The room erupted in applause. David felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Emily smiling. "This is what happens when you stand up to bullies the right way," she said quietly. As David looked around at his celebrating team, he spotted a familiar face in the back of the room. It was James from Legal, holding up a newspaper. The headline read, "Former Tech Manager Faces Industry Blacklist Over Harassment Charges." Marcus's story had become a cautionary tale in the industry. But David felt no satisfaction in Marcus's downfall. Instead, he felt proud of what they had built from the ashes of that toxic environment. His team had proved that success didn't require fear or intimidation. It came from support, respect, and standing together against bullying. "Speech," someone called out, and others joined in. David shook his head, smiling. "No speech. This award belongs to all of us. Every person in this room helped create this workplace. We did it together, and that's how we'll keep moving forward." The team's applause echoed through the office, a sound of genuine joy and unity, something that would have been impossible just 6 months ago. 1 year had passed since the day David first stood up to Marcus. TechCore Solutions was hosting its annual technology conference, but this year was special. The main hall was packed with people from different companies, all eager to hear about the workplace transformation that had made headlines in the tech industry. David stood backstage, adjusting his tie nervously. Through the curtain, he could see his entire team sitting in the front rows, wearing their new company t-shirts with the slogan, "Stand Together, Rise Together," an idea that had come from their newest junior developer. "Ready?" Sarah asked, appearing beside him with the presentation notes. "The crowd's bigger than we expected. 300 people, at least." David took a deep breath. "A year ago, I could barely speak up in team meetings. Now I'm giving a keynote speech." "That's exactly why they need to hear from you," Sarah smiled. "Real change comes from real experiences." Mr. Thompson stepped onto the stage first. Today's speaker showed us that true leadership isn't about intimidation or fear. It's about courage, integrity, and lifting others up. Please welcome our head of development, David Chen. The applause was warm as David walked to the podium. He saw familiar faces in the audience: Emily from HR, James from Legal, and even Tom, who had returned to the team 3 months ago. But what caught his attention was a group of young developers from other companies, eagerly leaning forward in their seats. "A year ago," David began, his voice steady, "I was sitting where many of you are now, dealing with a workplace bully, feeling trapped and powerless. Today, I want to share not just my story, but our story of transformation." As David spoke, he showed slides of their team's journey, the new mentoring program that had helped 5 junior developers become project leads, the anonymous feedback system that had prevented 2 potential harassment cases, the collaboration framework that had improved project delivery times by 60%. "But our proudest achievement," David continued, "isn't in these numbers. It's in the smiles you see when people come to work. It's in the confidence of junior team members asking questions without fear. It's in the knowledge that everyone's voice matters." During the Q&A session, a young programmer stood up. "What would you say to someone who's facing workplace bullying right now?" David thought about his answer carefully. "Document everything. Build a support network. And remember, standing up doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means being smart, strategic, and professional in how you handle the situation." After the conference, the team gathered for a celebration dinner. Mr. Thompson raised his glass to David, who showed us that one person standing up can inspire others to stand together. "Actually," David replied, "I'd like to share something with everyone." He pulled out a letter he'd received that morning. "Remember those 3 employees who quit before Marcus left? They've started their own company, and they built their entire workplace culture around the anti-bullying framework we developed." Sarah grinned. "So our impact is spreading." "Like ripples in a pond," Emily added. Each person who stands up creates waves of change. Later that evening, as David was leaving the restaurant, he found a young developer waiting outside. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm going through something similar at my company. Your speech today gave me hope. David looked at the nervous young man and saw himself from a year ago. He pulled out his business card. Call me tomorrow. We'll talk about it properly and figure out a plan. You don't have to face this alone. As David drove home, he thought about how much had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by purpose. The silence had become strength. And most importantly, the cycle of workplace bullying that Marcus had perpetuated was being broken, one brave stand at a time. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Next week's team building activity, anti-bullying workshop for local tech startups. You in? David smiled, typing his reply. Always, because standing up isn't a one-time thing. It's a commitment we make every day to ourselves and to others. The city lights twinkled as he drove, reminding him of all the people out there facing their own Marcus. But now, thanks to their story, they had a roadmap to follow. A way to stand up, speak out, and create positive change.